Hi, I'm Stevie Ray Causey.
And I'm Gretchen SB.
And you're listening to Exceptionally Average Authors Explain It All.
We're two exceptionally average authors talk about stuff.
So, Stevie, what do you write and what are you currently working on so that our lovely listeners can get a feel for who you are?
Well, I write young adult stories about magic, misfits, and the power of personal growth. And my current project is I'm writing a Rumpelstiltskin retelling trilogy. The first book just released in April, and I'm currently on book 2, which is called King's Prisoner. And Gretchen, what do you write, and what are you currently working on?
I write all over the flippin' board. I do urban fantasy, supernatural suspense, paranormal romance, and a little bit of clean and wholesome romance, mainly because I have a problem keeping my attention on one series at a time. I have 2 current projects. One is a serialized urban fantasy that I have up on a serialized story website, and I am rereading my Holliton Homicide series, which is my supernatural suspense about a homicide detective who gets introduced to a supernatural world. So that I can spend the rest of this year finishing off the last 3 books of that series. Stevie, you decided to publish your books independently. For those of you who don't know much about the independent author world, that means both Stevie and I published without use of a publishing house, one of the big 5 like Penguin, Random House, those things. I think those 2 are actually the same company. Or a small publishing house, or any kind of cooperative. We took the road alone and just decided to do all of it ourselves, which means we hire out for covers and editing. We do our own marketing. Stevie, what made you decide to go that route instead of one of the more common pathways when it came to writing?
First of all, I wouldn't say that independently publishing is uncommon anymore in this day and age. I think the numbers would disagree. But at the time that I published my first book in 2016, I call that whole series, and this isn't a judgment on quality. This is a judgment on my journey with that book. That's my vanity series. It was done to prove that I could finish a series because I was trying to decide whether I was going to be like a one-hit wonder and then fade into the background, or if this was something that was going to be viable for me to pursue as a career. And it started with my first book, Ring of Fire, which was a nano project based off of notes that I kept from middle school. And for those of you who don't know, nano is a NaNoWriMo. It's short for National Novel Writing Month, and it is a annual contest that goes on online where you try to write 50,000 words in the month of November. I did it as a nano project to support one of my siblings who was also doing nano, and then I sat on it for a really long time. The thing that made me go back to it was that my dad got sick, and he was a writer who was independently published, although that's not the only avenue that he'd been published through. It was just where he was at that time. And I published it July 4th, a little bit rushed, as someone who had no idea what independent publishing was and just was like, this is what's available to me. I'm going to internet research the best I can, format it myself, and throw it up so he can see it before he dies. And he died at the end of July. So that was how I got started in independent publishing. And then once I'd gotten out there and started to see not only that it was viable as a career, but what a great community was involved, that's when I decided that I was going to really dig my heels in and make it work as a career.
And did you manage the 50,000 words?
I did, and actually that's the only time I have. I've participated in nano multiple times, and the only time that I actually did it all in 1 month was with my first book.
That's fantastic.
Right. Part of it is because sheer determination of I was proving that I could finish something for the first time, and I'm stubborn. And then part of the reason that I haven't finished after that is because of what a horrible editing process that book was for me. And so I dabble, but I really don't fight for it because it's not worth it in the editing for me personally.
So what made you decide to stay indie with your latest series? And do you just write indie, or have you branched out since then?
I just write indie right now. I've had a couple of other contracts I've done. I've done ghostwriting for book packaging companies. I've done some parenting articles on the side that are unrelated to the rest of the stuff that I write. Part of what I love about being indie is that I get to do it my way. I know that's probably a pretty common thing. And it's not in the, like, I don't want my writing to be criticized. It's more like, well, I want to decide how much research goes into it, and I want to decide to scrap it 12,000 words in and start over to make a better story. Working with other people's rules and other people's formats, I can do it, and it's not that it doesn't make a great story, it just doesn't make a story in the way that I feel I need to make stories. And I also like control.
That's fair. I think that's true of a lot of indie authors.
Yeah. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Gretchen and I, we actually met when I had only one book out and was a super insecure baby author. She took her experience and wisdom and helped usher me firmly into the world of indie. So Gretchen, why don't you tell our listeners how you got your start in the indie world?
Oh, that gives me a lot of credit, Stevie. I'm just an average Joe. I'm not super knowledgeable. I just want to say that now.
You are adult to your adult.
Well, I mean, not by much. Stevie and I are in this independent and small press author group where a bunch of us authors will go to in-person shows, usually in Washington and Oregon, but a couple of us do branch out from there. And we go to like Comic-Cons and community events, and we sell physical copies of our books at those events. So that is how we met, is through a mutual author friend of ours that introduced both of us to that group. That's a nice place to be. I really appreciate that particular group because I spent like 10 or 12 years working at haunted houses into my mid to late 20s. And one of my friends there actually independently published his own book 6 months before I did. And he just kept talking about how great it was and how I should do it because he knew that my heart was in writing and storytelling. And so I did minimal research. And I say minimal because at the time I thought I did plenty, but in actuality, I did not. And then I published my first book, Lady of the Dead, which is the first book in a paranormal romance series that's going to be like 24 books long. I decided to independently publish because, I had shopped around both Lady of the Dead and one of my other first books, Holliton Homicide, to several publishers and literary agents, and just it never got traction. And no one was interested in reading it. And that's not to say that the books are bad. It's just that people weren't looking for stuff in those cross sections of urban fantasy at that time. And so I was really disheartened by it. And so when I realized in fall 2013 that I could publish myself and it could be on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all this stuff, it opened a new door to me. That was really cool, and that was why I independently published. And then my original mentor, he only published the one book. He had a plan to do another, a book every 6 months, which back in 2013 you could do viably, which is harder to do now. He just never got around to the others. And so I went looking for an indie author community. And when I found the group that Stevie and I belonged to, I was just like, oh, these are my people. And then I, subsequently went on to make lots of mistakes. That's how I came to be where I am today.
I'd like to go back to one of the things that I heard you say that was really interesting to me, the way that you worded it, because I've heard it worded this way before, and I've also seen some really awesome conversations happening with some of the less average, exceptional indie authors about that same concept, where you were saying that people weren't looking for at that time. And I want to go ahead and clarify that when you say people, you mean publishers, because people are indeed, and we're indeed looking for that. That's how indie came to be. It's one of the misconceptions is that you can throw up anything and have it be viable, but it's really just about knowing the difference between how genre works between independent and traditionally published, because independently published books have genres that don't exist in traditional publishing.
That is very true. Yeah, that's 100%.
So readers were absolutely looking for your stories.
Yeah,
a lot of
cross-genre stuff.
Yeah, which now is considered like niche group, and everyone's trying to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
So you were ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
I like how enthusiastic you really sell yourself with that one.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that, and it took me a while to learn this, that I think that, and Stevie, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that a lot of authors were less like secure, and imposter syndrome, which is where you think you don't belong there, is very prevalent for indie authors, especially because there is that, that thought that the publishing houses are those gatekeepers that make sure only quality books make it through, which, we've all read a book or two from a publishing house where you're just like, oh, why did this get published? The imposter syndrome is very, very strong. And so whenever I talk about my books, I have to force myself not to talk 100% negative, which means you still get the 40% negative, which kind of comes across as this like, meh, unenthused voice, because I'm trying so hard to drag the voice of not reason back from vocally displaying.
That's so funny that you say that. Well, because it's so funny, and it's actually going to roll into the book that I'm reading right now. Society, especially anything that is born of academia, and I love academia. That is my home. I was born and raised in the classroom, and I will love it forever. And literature and literacy, it's all connected to that same area, but there is an air of like superiority that does come with it. And when you talk about publishers being gatekeepers, and the idea that our society has those gatekeepers automatically lead you to quality content is such an illusion, because their job is to be a business, to talk about what's financially viable. And what we're seeing more and more because of that is important voices getting shut out. And I don't think anyone who has looked at a high school English lit reading list is going to be surprised by that fact. But even as we are unsurprised, even as we say, yeah, it's kind of an elitist process based on what people will buy because it is a business, we have trouble acknowledging that also that means that these people who are telling stories over here might have something of value. And I think that does. It feeds that imposter syndrome, and it's super inaccurate because that's not how the indie world works. There are rules, there are like best practices, there are ethics. You can get yourself in trouble and it will hurt your career. It's just that we are the small printing press. We are our own gatekeeper. And that's really what I came to love about the indie world, because, again, since I do come from academia, I come with a little bit of thumb down my nose, just conditioned into me, that I have to fight. And I struggled with the idea of self-publishing because of it. But the more and more that I'm with other artists in the community, the more that I see that storytelling is inherently part of what makes us human. And you can't gatekeep that. There's my soapbox about publishing companies.
Yeah, and you're right. Like what you said initially with you want to be in control of your own content, and what you just said about being your own gatekeeper. I'm sure that we both have had situations where we've scrapped a whole book or part of a book, or been a third of the way through and been like, this is not good, this is not where I want to go with this, or I've written myself into a corner and had to gatekeep that content and just be like, you know what, this is going away.
Right. Well, and it's also really great practice for me to unpack, like, am I gatekeeping this because it needs to go? Am I gatekeeping this because of imposter syndrome? And am I so close to this that I need to let someone else look at it? And that's another thing that I think that needs to be dispelled about the indie circuit, is that it's not that there's no oversight. We are functioning as an entire company independently.
And many of us have multiple hats and multiple jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings me to our topic. This month, we wanted to talk about the most glaring thing happening in the world right now, and that is being a creative during quarantine. Start us off. How is writing during the quarantine and having your own publishing company during the quarantine going for you now that we are more than a month in?
Oh, man. I think it's kind of a mixed bag for everyone. For me personally, we were getting locked down right as I was needing to get my nose to the grind on a release that, I mean, when you're creative running your own thing, it never goes as planned. But for real, I needed to sit down and get it done. So initially, it was pretty good because that got out, that got done. It went through 2 rounds of edits. It was beautiful. I didn't have the world interrupting as much. And now we are past that point and going into book 2, which the in-between 2 books in one series is one of my most favorite things. Because it's when I get to do all my research and all my fun and all my sketching and all my, my creative brain is in love with it.
The world building!
Oh, man. Oh, I can just play all day, and there's no word count, and there's no responsibility, but there still is, though.
Yes.
But I can pretend that there's not, and I'm loving that, right? But then you look at, time is meaningless, and nothing in society is moving forward right now. We all feel kind of frozen, and so it's really tempting to just live in that little fantasy world and not have to worry about the word count, or is it Thursday, is it Friday, is it a work day for me, do I know, am I wearing yesterday's pajamas? and the executive function just kind of untangles. So we're finally hitting the point where I am going, okay, look, in order to maintain schedule, we're going to have to do not just business as usual, but business as usual on top of distance learning for my kiddos. Business as usual, but I can't go hiking, which is a major, for me, when I'm plotting something, when I'm working through something, hiking in the woods is a big deal. I write a lot of fantasy. The world building is beautiful, and the Pacific Northwest has so many opportunities for me to go experience what a world like that would be like. Mm-hmm. Because I struggle with visual descriptors as someone with aphantasia, which means I can't picture things in my head the way that other people can. So being cut off from that aspect, that's hurting. That's hurting pretty bad. But at the same time, I'm having lots of excuses to research things. So I've bought a lot of books. I'm reading parts of a lot of books. I guess I would say that I'm scattered at this point. I'm it's all starting to scatter, and we'll see what happens now.
Sounds about right.
Right? One of the ways that I've been trying to counter that is I show up to a lot of live streams, productivity live streams with author tubers. And there's a really cool schedule so you can see who's streaming on what days. And I try to, as part of my own self-care, not as a human, not just as a business person, to show up for myself and schedule at least 3 of those a week.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Yeah, it can be. But that's how it really, it seems like a lot when you compare it to how much I'm getting done during that time. Because often I'll be like, okay, I'm working on, admin today, or I'm working on plotting, and really you'll see me in the chat go like, okay, guys, it turned to janitorial and I need to talk to my union. And then on the next words, I'll be like, the union says they don't care because I'm self-employed and I am the union. So it's a lot, but it's good company, and it's the only way I get things done right now.
Setting aside time is always very important.
Right, and having it be like, I'm setting aside time and there are other people there. And if I'm not there, since I'm not on screen, I was on screen one time and I will be again from time to time, but if I'm not in the live stream, then I can bail, but the people are what keep me coming.
Yeah.
It's fun. So you need, in a time where we are so restricted socially, to have access to 10 people's ideas while I'm working. That's A+. Chef kiss right now, Gretchen. That's what's happening. How about you? How are you handling creativity at the time of COVID?
I'm not handling it as well as I thought I would. I am, at my base soul core of a person, an extreme introvert. So staying at home in my house is fine. I don't have any offspring, and my husband is considered essential. So it's just me and occasionally the dog in the house, and that's it. But I am working from home, so good chunks of my day are working for the day job. And I always thought that if I was working from home, I would get so much more done. I just kept saying to myself, oh man, if I work for a university, so, oh man, if I got one of those, 6-month sabbaticals, I would get so much writing done. And that was just a lie. I was lying to myself. I I have cleaned up part of the house. Our house is very cluttered. We have more stuff than we have space. So I spend a lot of quarantine doing that. And I, like you, Stevie, really enjoy world building, and I really enjoy organizing, and not in the normal way where you clean and organize, but like I like organizing my time down to the hour and how many titles I'm going to publish each year. And so that's a huge thing for me. So I spent like a day doing that. And the way I do that is we have a den, and that's where the desk is that I work at, and I have stick-it notes all over the wall that are color coordinated by series, and they're all in gaps. So there's gaps between each color, and I spent that day doing these huge to-do lists, and I had a 70-item to-do list for quarantine that involved me writing 15 or 16 books. And
sorry.
No, it deserves a laugh. And doing my edits for those books, which takes me longer than reading, and I dictate my books, so I go pretty quickly. Most of those, though, I will say, are going to be novelettes or novelettes, depending on how you pronounce it. And that means they're going to be, like longer short stories. So it's not going to take me like forever to do them, but at the same time, like, come on, Gretchen, like, what are we thinking? So I had that to-do list, and I did that back at the end of March, and I was like, I'm going to be so productive, and I crossed off 3 things in March. And so I got
70?
Yeah, out of 70.
Right.
And I narrowed it down to 60. Like, I cut some of the stuff out because I was like, you know what, this is ridiculous. None of the author stuff, it was other stuff, because, why take the things that are going to be time-consuming off of your to-do list? And so about a week ago, I then said, this is not going to work. Like, I don't know how I'm going to get this done. So I then took more Post-it notes and did a week-by-week breakdown to-do list. Of, I need to write this many chapters, I need to reread this many pages, I need to edit, this much each week. And then I did that. And so then I started writing that serialized story I mentioned, and I got 2 chapters in, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to get this done this week. So then, in a different colored giant Post-it note, I then posted a day-by-day time schedule for the entire week. And I got everything done properly on Monday. I got about 4/5 of Tuesday, and then half of Wednesday, and then 1 thing crossed off Thursday, and so far on Friday, I've done none of it. So it's not working well.
Feels kind of like your approach to your creative self. Like, if I just beat it hard enough and die it down, it'll do the words for me.
I have to, otherwise I get distracted. This is how I end up writing 4 series at once.
That didn't sound like you being distracted at all, Gretchen. 70. It sounds totally like you were on task.
But yeah, so as a creative in COVID, I was kind of like, I feel like I should it's going to be a while till my next book comes out. I should do something to give people content that's free, since everyone's freaking stuck at home and people are losing their jobs. And so I posted this story, Going Lone Wolf, which started out as something entered into a short story contest years ago that I hadn't done anything with. I thought, being who I am, that I would, be able to post something every 3 days, and I'd have a chapter up, and I would get this done, and that it would only be like 20 or 30 chapters, and that didn't work out the way I thought it would, much like everything else in my creative writing process. Good news is it's going to be like 55 chapters and 100 and some thousand words. The bad news is that, just like every other series that I write, I will write, anywhere from 4 to 6 chapters, and then I won't have any more for like like 10 days because my brain's like, okay, something else now. And it just wanders away. That's how I've been doing during COVID, is I've been scattered all over the place and nowhere near as like efficient as you. And for anyone listening, you can also tell Stevie is much more succinct than I am in general. And this comes across with me babbling on about making schedules more than writing.
Oh, I think, when we talk about independent authors and wanting control, that your desire for control comes out really strong in that story. And it's cute how you think that I'm being more productive, because I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I just show up for the time slot that I said I was. That's my one goal for myself, is to show up for myself. I'm here. That's all. That's all I need, right? And then, if you keep showing up for yourself, something happens. We'll see if it's good. We'll see if it's good. I'm not sure. I mean, it's going to be good, because I won't let it not be. It's that control piece again, which is really funny, because guess what? That was totally like part of the theme of the book that just came out in April, was like fate versus choice, and how we hurt ourselves by trying to control too much, set into the theme of a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. It's a little on the nose for me right now.
I was gonna say, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because maybe part of the reason that I am productive in a time of distress is because the way that I write is less about, for me, escapism, and more about like personally attacking myself through my writing.
That's nice.
Yeah, like becoming aware of my subconscious pattern and things that might need some attention. That's part of why this last book was so hard, is because I went in thinking it was going to be one thing, and then like 12,000 words into it was like, oh, it's not working because it's not how I do stuff. And then I redid it and was like, oof, this is way too personally attacking. I guess we'll keep going. A glutton for punishment and all that. And it turned into something beautiful at the end, but man, I know that when I have to go back and to reread it to do book 2, and I don't usually read after, like, I don't think once something is published, I have not read anything that I've written.
Really?
I don't know if that's usual. No, I hate reading what I wrote.
I do as well, but I make myself do it, which is why I'm only a third of the way through Holoton.
No, because then I would just try to rewrite it.
Yes, that
like I know better now, and it's a great story, and the point of the story is for it to be good, and then for you to grow, because we all want to grow, we all want to be better, but we definitely don't want to look at a time that we weren't as good as we are now.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. I don't know about you, but I've been like really pumped to be a creative person during COVID. Like, my own need to organize my post-it notes aside, and like my post-it note problem, because it's what I asked for Christmas every year. The creative community during COVID has actually, it seems like, really, really stepped up. I mean, there's people doing concerts in, their living rooms, just so that people have music, to Sir Patrick Stewart reading sonnets every day. You know? And it's just, it makes me like, there is a bit of imposter syndrome that sneaks in there, but it makes me really proud to be part of the creative community, because everyone's like, well, I can do something, whether that be, the podcast stuff that you guys are on where you're streaming, or me giving away a free story. We have author friends in our author group that are reading chapters of their books or reading short stories every day. And like, we all are just trying to help everyone fill that day with this more positive, creative energy. And it makes me really proud to be part of a community that is just like, all right, this is our time to shine, people.
Oh, yeah. Like, I definitely remember as things were boiling down, and I realized, like, especially because this particular project that I just did was so personal to me and unearthed so many things, as this was, barreling down on us and we were facing lockdown. I was going, oh man, but this is what I'm here for. This is why I became a writer. Yeah. Is because I came from a background of not feeling like I had anyone, and books are how I knew that I wasn't alone. And I think that that's kind of universal for all of the arts, because that's how we tell our story. And content creators, man, they are keeping me afloat during this time for sure. I am all about it. Please give me your content. I want it so much.
Yeah. We'll see how much longer quarantine lasts out, if even creatives will burn out. But next week, we are hoping to have an interview for you guys with one of those authors we mentioned who's been reading chapters of one of their books. I think it's either every day or every week. Her name is T.M. Franklin, and Stevie is going to do an interview with her on what it's been like to be a creative during COVID and what sort of feedback she gets reading her book to people on Facebook Live, and how her journey is different than Stevie and mine, being independently published. So that should be a very entertaining interview. And we
I still need to tell her we're doing.
It's a surprise!
Surprise!
By the time...
Can we announce to her that she's doing it by sending her this?
Oh my gosh.
Hey, Tami, did you know you're on our podcast?
By the time this airs, don't worry. We will have spoken to T.M. Franklin.
And I will tell you how she reacted.
Yeah. Stevie will be able to tell you next week how she reacted, or next episode. Just to round out this episode, we want to give you some of our book recommendations. And that's because we are big readers as well. A lot of authors started out by reading and a love of reading. So, Stevie, what have you been reading / what have you enjoyed recently that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh, man. So my book recommendation right now, because I'm in between projects and that's when I start doing all of my, give me more about humanity and stories and research and what do we want from a story, is called The Storytelling Animal, How Stories Make Us Human. And it's by Jonathan, I'm going to butcher this name, Jonathan Gottschall. And it is so good. Evolutionary psychology perspective of stories and storytelling.
No, interesting.
It's so good. It starts with, child development and how children experience stories. And one of the things that they say is that it's psychologically compulsory to tell stories. And that to bar them from Neverland would be an act of violence. It's actually part of our human brains. It needs them. Which makes me feel great to be like, people need what I do. Also makes me like, oh my gosh, what do they need? Because it goes over what is satisfying about a story and what are our responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of a storyteller? Because we're all storytellers as humans. And one of the things it does talk about that I think is relevant in this period of time is things like conspiracy theories, when it uses an example of why we need to be cautious about stories. And since I've seen a few of those floating around about COVID. Anyway, so I think it's worth a read. As a reader, as a writer, as a human being, as someone who wants to understand themselves better and the world better, I am super loving it.
That sounds like a good book.
Oh god, it's so good. It's so good. What about you reading?
I am not good about reading nonfiction. I've been doing audiobooks more than reading. Since I'm working from home, I will click on an audiobook and listen to it while I'm working. And so reading for the sake of reading, I have not done in a little while. But the audiobook, I am currently listening to, I think it's book 43. Let me look it up. It is J.D. Robb. And for those of you who don't know, J.D. Robb is Nora Roberts' pen name. And it's Apprentice in Death. Yes, I am about 2 to 3 years behind in the J.D. Robb series because I pick it up for a little while and then I get distracted and then I pick it up and then I get distracted. And I always recommend that to people who like murder mysteries that are not necessarily all that are cop books, but not all jargon and hard and don't have as much personality to them. The way Nora Roberts writes her characters, it's like every single cop, Eve Dallas's department in the homicide department, her friends, they all have very distinct personalities. And I think it's Lorelei King is her narrator, and she is just a fantastic narrator. She's so great with voices, and so I always recommend J.D. Robb's books simply because they're just such a nice ride, and it's a nice bit of escapism, which is my main reason for reading, is escapism. Because I like going to different places. I think it's fun. So I highly recommend her In Death series. It's like 50 some books long now, I think. I don't know how she does it. I don't know if I could write 50 books, but that would be my recommendation.
All right, that's all for our first episode. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe share and stalk us on our social media, or at least from a socially respectable distance during this pandemic. This has been Exceptionally Average Authors Explain It All.